Hi, my name is Joe. I play games. Let's talk about it. We're back. This is going to be roleplay game vlog number 2. Last time we were talking about how the mechanics of Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition don't really cater to player narrative creativity. How the rules sometimes are just a little bit too rigid for me, and even that little bit of creativity that comes in from combining aspects of skills and attributes allows for a player to make a narrative choice rather than just a skill choice. Today, I kind of want to talk a little bit more about the Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition system and how much I'm okay with it. I think in this aspect, I want to talk a little bit about the safety mechanisms that are within Dungeons and Dragons, and overall the way that the game caters to the GM. Because again, a lot of my experience comes from being at a GM for the last 5 years, and it's a position that I love very, very much. Again, I talked about it, and listening back to the video, I was just kind of like, man, do I love being a GM because of the power play? Because I get to make all the rules? Because I get to do all this? And I basically said, yeah, I do. And I stand by that. But also, I want to talk about how it's a big responsibility to be a GM. And I think it's really important to be both at the table, to be a player and a GM in different capacities, because I think you learn a lot from that. Very much like, because my background's acting. I'm an actor. That's what I went to school for. That's what I do. I'm familiar with the production of a big film studio budget and the conversations around that. And I think some of the big conversations that kind of happen around, like, well, if you want to be a really good director, you got to be a really good actor. That was one of the big things when I was in school, is that we had all these directors coming into acting 101. And I was just kind of like, what are you doing here? What? You poor young sapling. What are you doing here? But it was good. It's important to kind of get. I understood why they were doing it. It's important to get that perspective of, like, what is an actor really doing to prepare for a scene? What is an actor doing to really get immersed into the role? How do they communicate with the director and with themselves? It's a great thing to do. It's really important to have the perspective of that. So I think any good player can be a good GM. Uh, what what I struggle with fifth edition, and sometimes at other tables and other games, is that when the game is more tailored to the gameplay itself than it is to the actual people at the table. To put that into context, there are games that I've played. I think the best one that I play, who really puts like people at the front rather than the characters, is Wanderhome, a game by J Dragon at, oh, what is their publisher? I love their publisher's name. It's such a good name. By Possum Creek Games. Wanderhome is a really, really good game because it's a very open narrative game. But what it does is it puts the players first. The whole system is catered to creation and really taking the liberty that everyone at the table is creating something, either somebody, some place, objects, lore. Like, everybody at the table is showing up to make something in the world. It really definitely gives those vibes of just kind of like grade school kids traveling off down by the pond and creating stories together. Of like, one person says, like, I met a frog the other day, and then somebody, I did too, and he was wearing a top hat, and then somebody says, and we went dancing under the moonlight, singing to the Mississippi. Like, that's the vibe that it gives, and I love that. It's just kind of like what people going like, oh, this fantastical story that we're building all together, which I believe is the whole like idea with a tabletop game. Like, that's what you're supposed to do. But what they do with their rules is that they set up really good guidelines for doing that. They set up like the premise very clearly of just kind of like, this could be a GM'd adventure, this could be a GM-less adventure. Here are the tools that you need to use in order to make sure that people don't argue, that people don't fight. They implement a lot of safety rules into the game. And Wanderhome, I think, was like my big first experience with like safety rules at a table, because up until that point, like, I had done a lot of 5th edition. I had done a lot of like games with really big rules, like Pathfinder, like Wild Talents, where just kind of like the whole game was based on the mechanics of things, like how you build a game, how you build a character to conquer a game. And that's fun I think rules are really good in that regard, but there needs to be some direction for how the players handle things outside of the game. Because I think that can be a really big pitfall for a lot of games, especially if like there's a lot of ideas at the table. What Wanderhome does really well is they implement a system of a lot of the commonly used ones like script change, X card, lines and veils, which I'll get into in another video, I'm sure. But that's it's important to have those tools so that you know how to socially maneuver conflict. Because I think that's one of the hardest things about being a creative in any sort of capacity is that oftentimes, from my experience, I feel that I'm creating alone. That if I want my vision to be seen and heard, then I've really got to fight for my vision to be seen and heard. And I see that a lot in a lot of different people in a lot of different capacities. Like in my work as an actor in San Francisco, that's definitely what it felt like sometimes. Of like, if I want to be here, then I got to show up and be the character that I want or be the actor that I want to be. And not that that's a bad thing. Like, I think you need to show up to be seen, but also, like, the creative process really thrives when it's collaborative. Like, it can't just be one person trying to push everything in a single direction. Like, that's Sisyphusian energy. Like, that's if everyone's pushing against you, then you're not going to go anywhere. And it's hard to find that balance. It's really hard to find like a really good creative partner in that sense, or a creative community, or a creative team. Like, I think some of the greatest marvels in this on this planet are when people get together to move in a single direction. It is phenomenal. And I think that's often neglected at a tabletop table, because more times than not, it's a group of people who are a bunch of friends who have been friends for a long time coming together to create exactly that. And I think the going is good for a very long time, especially if it's like centered in that. Friends who have been through a lot of things, they know how to communicate with one another, they know how to play together. But oftentimes, I think at every table that I've been at, there will come a snag. There will always come a snag where somebody's creative vision, somebody's creative ability, somebody's emotional intensity comes into question, or comes into some sort of scrutiny, or an insecurity is revealed through that. That it's difficult because we're all human beings, we all feel a lot of things. And if you don't have the right tools to navigate those kind of encounters, like it could be a big hurdle in both like a friendship, but in the context of which I'm speaking, like a game, because there's so many people there. And so one of the things that I don't like about fifth edition is that it is one of those games that like really, really focuses in on the rules. And if and here's my other big thing about it. Like, if it's a game that's going to be really focusing in on the rules, then a really good GM needs to come in and really create story around it. And I think that we see that more often than not. Really good GMs creating a really good narrative around a set of rules to kind of dictate where it's going. But in that, there are no real tools for a GM to safely do that. That's another huge thing. In games like Cyberpunk and games like Mothership, there's a whole section where the GM kind of talks about like, all right, here's how you need to structure an adventure and adhere to it. Like, they give you story tools to really talk about like, here's how you build like an adventure that resolves upon itself, that is structured, that is well maintained, that people can kind of like cling on to and be familiar with by using tropes, by using beats, by using acts. But then, like, that often goes a little bit further of just kind of like make sure that like everybody at the table is agreeing on this topic, or make sure that because these themes include violence, graphic violence, horror, like everyone is there for it. One of my favorite games, Die RPG, based on a comic book series. It's so immersed in emotional turmoil. Like, that's the gameplay, is that the DM the DM is constantly putting people through emotional turmoil. And it should be focused on the characters, but oftentimes because of the layeredness of that game, it could be the players. Like, it could start to bleed into characters, and the game talks about bleed in that way of just like, if at any point you start to feel that the actions that your character are taking are becoming the actions that you are taking, and people are now scrutinizing the actions that you feel that you are taking, Take a step back. Let's breathe for a moment. Like the game says that. And it does so with still being like still upholding the rules of play, still being a really good game. it's it's difficult because oftentimes if a game is going to explode or implode, it's because of player conflict. It's because some event has happened that is causing people to disconnect with one another at the table. Not their characters, not gameplay, it's that. Your friends will sit through a bad game. Not because they love you, but because they want to be a part of it. Well, I hope it's because they love you. They probably, I'm not going to say that they don't. That they love you. Your friends love you. Please, God damn it. Your friends will sit through a bad game with you if they feel that they have a say in it. If they feel that they're having fun. But it's when that fun starts to be limited or when that fun starts to be questioned that players will leave the table. That's what happens more often than not, and I don't think there's enough conversations really about that. With 5th edition, I think it's really easy to get caught up in what you play as because there's so many ways to play that game. It could be a strictly narrative game. It could be a strictly combat game. It could be something entirely different. Especially in the media world that we are now, a lot of people are trying to build outside of Dungeons and Dragons and write a story that's not based in a fantasy setting. And so with that, there becomes a lot of creative liberties and a lot of like pushes against like the rules. And that can cause conflict. That can cause difficulties. So I think that's a really big thing to consider if you're ever making a game or considering playing a game, is that you set up some safety rules. Or that if you're going to play a game, you should absolutely consider the implications that you are going to have on one another. So that's my big rant for the day. I think 5th edition needs some more conditioning in how to run a game, both in the world and at the table. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I think, and the greatest thing is that all of these problems that do come up, they're not the end of the world. I think that's something that I've taken a long time to consider. Something that I've really had to learn. Is that conflicts like that, if they ever do pop up, it's not the end of a friendship. It's not the end of the world. And there are ways to effectively communicate with other people. But sometimes that may happen. That may have to happen within the game, outside of the game, adjacent to the game. But as long as all your players are on the same page, I think that should be okay. All right, my time's up. That's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Please check out the podcast. Please check out all of our other channels, all of our other videos. If you like this, give us a like. If you want to tell me what safety tools that you like, safety tools that you've created at your own table, please comment down below. I'd love to know them. I love learning about all the safety tools that there is. I'll release a video. I have things. Don't worry about it. But yeah, please check us out, Roleplay Game, wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you so much, and you have a great day.